This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more.
Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange with me, Arthur Parkinson, for a Chelsea Flower Show special. I am solo today, so everybody who's been wanting me to be back on, you've got me for the best part of 20 minutes talking all things Chelsea, because dear Sarah is, I think today, travelling back from Scotland. She's been in Scotland writing a book. So Sarah's been in lovely, tranquil Scotland, probably looking at lovely views and I'm sure eating and cooking delicious food and copy editing her book. Whereas I have been in very bustling, crowded, hot, but extra beautiful London for Chelsea Flower Show 2025. And it's a long week for me these days because I go on the Monday, which is press day. And years previously, of course, I've been working for Sarah because last year we had a stand. This year we didn't have a stand. So I go to Chelsea when I'm not necessarily working it, years like this, just in awe of everybody who has put all the effort into creating the show, whether you're on a show garden or in the Great Pavillion that of course gets all the media attention. But I take my hat off to all the trade stands that are there at Chelsea, because for anyone who's visited, you will quickly realise Chelsea is very much a garden shop-a-thon, and you have to put a lot of effort into your trade stand. So it's a long week for everybody, and a long week for everybody prior to the show opening because you're setting up. So my week started on the Monday. I got into London, I think about 9:15, because even on press day you have to get there as early as you can to get the whole feel of the show before it gets too busy with various celebs and press and things like that. Someone told me they were queuing up behind Gemma Collins. I won't say who that person told me, but the impression of Gemma Collins, which I will do very poorly now, is I'm just getting a selfie with Monty Don, then I'm leaving. So that was Gemma Collins, and she was there in gorgeous royal sweeping blue. And then we had Amanda Holden, who I've never really followed, but she really made me laugh because someone dressed as a palm tree from, the Bahamas, somewhere beautiful with huge, gorgeous bromeliad flowers cladded to their hair, said, "Oh, you look there, beautiful Amanda." And she said, "Thanks, so do you." So that's press day, and it's wonderful. And it's kind of where all the buzz of the show kind of starts to feed into the media, what's hot, what's getting all the attention. But this episode really is for me to try and give you all the highlights, whether you visited or maybe you saw it on the telly. But hopefully I'm going to tell you a few things that maybe weren't mentioned too much on the telly. So I'm going to start with the Great Pavillion, which is my favourite bit of the show, actually, because in a way you can kind of take in all the detail a lot more of these individual stands and collections of plants that are nurtured by these incredible nursery people. And there was a new display of fruit trees, all in blossom, and it looked incredible in the light of the Great Pavillion. And they'd been kept all in a huge fruit chiller to hold the blossom, which is an incredible achievement given it's been such a hot and dry spring. And this was by Frank P. Matthews, who'd been growing trees, in fact, since 1901. And it was a lovely kind of display of fruit trees, all in lovely terracotta pots. So lots of inspiration for small gardens. And from afar, it was just like a whirl of wedding confetti. And they were so elegant and just like a potted orchard. So for anybody who saw that, hopefully it was really good inspiration for those of you maybe with large or small gardens wanting trees in containers. Because I always say to people, if you're going to do trees, pick a fruit tree, then you're going to get blossom and fruit. So two lovely things from one tree. And it was wonderful to see the shapes of these trees. I really noticed a crabapple called Rudolph, which has very big white blossoms, and they were blushed with a good scarlet pink in bud. And it had a gorgeous branching habit shape from top to toe. They got silver gilt, which I thought was quite mean, to be honest, but I do hope they come back next year and they should be given a gold, because it was very refreshing to see fruit trees celebrated like this, just fruit trees. And of course, the more trees we can have in our gardens, the better and fuller they'll be for biodiversity. From spring trees to final goodbyes, the Farewell Flower Project did sustainable in-season British-grown cut flowers really proudly, with a wonderful willow coffin that was bursting with peonies, lupins and alaea and foxgloves like a huge tower party. And it was very wonderful coming out the top of this wicker willow coffin of all different lovely green shapes. And that was headed by Georgie Newbury of Common Farm Flowers, who some of you may follow on her social media, and it was supported by Flowers from the Farm. And Georgie did a great video on her Instagram leading up to the show opening of all these gorgeous buckets of peonies and the foxgloves arriving from Flowers from the Farm, because they coordinate British growers together to allow them to sell their British grown flowers. And she said, you know, when people say Britain doesn't grow enough cut flowers, this is my thing. Anyone who says we don't grow enough flowers, they are not telling the truth and they are not doing their research. So if you've got any events, head over to Grown on the Farm website and you'll find all the British cut flower suppliers. So this was a really good stand for championing British grown flowers. And Poppy Sturley, who did the gates last year as you go into Chelsea, the beautiful floral gate, she was in the Great Pavillion this year. And she did this wonderful exhibition step by step showing the beauty and mechanics of simply using vases and sustainable mechanics to help arrange in water. So it was really championing the fact that you do not need to use Oasis or any unsustainable things to get your flowers looking beautiful for events, big or small. And then her and her team had done this incredible, wonderful, like Bramley hedge avenue of cow parsley and foxgloves and honeysuckle, and all sustainable in vases. And it would have taken them hours. And I think that's the thing. I managed to go to the show several times this week, and each time I tried to look at the effort, not just the beauty. How do they coordinate the flowers to be in tip-top condition for this show, and how do you decide how many people you need to create these arrangements? It really is an amazing Noah's Ark of both flowers and people to get this show looking as gorgeous as it is. And now, of course, a flower that did get a lot of press attention, as they always do with roses, because David Austin announced a new rose, the King's Rose, which I actually do love. I think it's going to be one of those roses that catch on more as a cut flower, personally, than one in the garden, because it's a real proper raspberry ripple Barbie doll Pat Butcher lipstick pink, blushed with white. And to be honest, it's a single rose, which is really good for bees. But when you flick through the David Austin catalogue, the single roses aren't the ones that are really put on the front cover. They're not the standout celebration of roses. So it's nice they've chosen a single one to name after the King Charles. And apparently this has been 10 years in production. And the king did deem it that it was a rose suitable to be called the King's Rose, so he likes it. Queen Camilla, there's a lovely photo of her smelling a bunch of these cut flower King's Roses, and they look, in my opinion, much better as a cut flower, so I can't wait to see them coordinated and arranged with all the other ripply, lovely sweet peas that we've fallen in love with, because it's a very good cut and come again rose and a very good bushy habit. They'd got a few in pots on the Highgrove stand, so a good rose for a big container, good branching habit, much nimbler and more refined than a lot of the shrubby tea roses that of course are double and harder for pollinators to get into. So that is the main rose. The main rose stand was David Austin with a few other nurseries, and it's always well worth, if you do manage to get into Chelsea first thing, I would really recommend going into the Great Pavillion first, because you get the fragrance of all the roses before it gets too busy, and then you really do feel like it's been worthwhile going into the David Austin rose stand. If it's packed out with people, unfortunately the human scent does outweigh the floral scent. So roses, it was really good to see roses celebrated on Main Avenue in one of the show gardens, which was the Joe Thompson's Glasshouse garden. And this was actually my favourite garden. It did get gold. And I'm recording today on the Friday, so I'm not sure which garden got awarded the People's Choice Award, but I know a lot of people love this garden because it was, I think they measured how much of the garden was packed with flowers, and I think it was a garden that ended up at about 75% planted, so not much hard landscaping at all. So the design was inspired, and it's by Women of the Glasshouse, which is a pioneering social enterprise that supports women leaving or are just about to leave prison through giving them access to horticultural training, resettlement support and employment for when they leave prison in gardening. And it's got an incredible 0% of reoffending rate for women who take part in this scheme. So it's a really nice charity that's trying to transform lives, offering a positive and purposeful future for women in custody, their families and wider society. And it's working. It's proven to be working. Gardening's offering women who want it a second chance and a new lease of life when they're released from prison, giving them skills to go on and have a career in horticulture. So it's a wonderful story. And Jo Thompson was the only female designer also of large show gardens at this year's Chelsea. So the whole point of the garden was bold, immersive, and to celebrate feminine strength, second chances, and the healing power of nature. And she certainly did that, Jo. What I loved the most was what I noticed before, actually. I noticed all the roses, was this garden had a very thick, beautiful, wild, rambling hedge. And at the very front, as you looked in, there was a very pronounced clump of nettles coming out the hawthorn hedge. So I thought, fantastic. You know, this is the sort of thing that we wouldn't have seen at a Chelsea 5-10 years ago at all. You would have probably been marked down for having a nettle in the garden, but of course we all know no nettles, none of our favourite butterflies. So well done, Jo, for putting in nettles in your hedge. Also, within the beautiful tapestry planting, it was a real summer pudding, sugar, plum tapestry of flowers. Lots of Digitalis, Sutton's Apricot, which of course are biennial, so you sow them now for this time next year. That's what's so good about a lot of the show gardens at Chelsea. They rely quite heavily on biennials. And as a visitor to the show garden, if you fall in love with a biennial, now's the perfect time to sow it. So you've got it next year. So Digitalis, Sutton's Apricot, sow now, tiny seed. So you want to be sowing that in a seed tray, let them germinate, then prick them out. But also from biennials to annuals, the star annual, of course, which is kind of a stalwart of Chelsea, are the opium poppies, the wonderful blousy silk, big opium poppies. The main one this year was Lauren's Grape, along with Black Beauty. And these are very fast to grow annuals. And actually this year, I've grown them for pots at home. And they can actually be pricked out as long as you do it as soon as they germinate. They have a tiny, tiny little slither of a root. It's almost like a tiny little bit of fishing wire attached to those first leaves. So get a tiny little pencil and prick them out very carefully and pop them on into a small pot, and they won't mind that. They will survive it if you do it when they're really, really tiny. But if you let them get quite big, they then will resent being root disturbed. If you want to direct sow them though, a trick I've learnt this year is fill an ice cube tray, those nice cubey ice cube trays, and sprinkle a tiny amount of opium poppy seed in each little ice cube cubicle. Put the whole thing in the freezer for a week. And then you can take out your ice cubes with the little poppies within the ice cubes and scatter them within a prepared and cleared flower bed. And the ice cube melts. And as long as you just put a few little tiny opium poppy seeds in the ice cube, they'll melt and disperse, and then they can germinate. And they're then not going to be crowded out by other things. So they'll germinate nicely with lots of space to become nice bulky plants. Very fast to grow, very glamorous, and wonderful for bumblebees. They're always a thing in the morning. They're full of bumblebees. They absolutely adore them. So a little bit of Chelsea gardening inspiration. But of course, with the opium poppies, it's a bit late now to sow them. So remember that tip for next May, I would say. So back to Jo's roses. What did she have? She had a wonderful rose that I know Sarah has championed for several years, Wild Rover, which is this most beautiful frangipane, smoky plum purple. It's a wonderful single rose, and it was wonderful to see that within a lot of the classic David Austin roses. So as well as that, she had Emma Bridgewater, which is quite a new David Austin that was released last year, named after Emma Bridgewater the potter, which is a very, very strawberry pink double, as well as Gabriel Oak, which is much more scarlet pink, and Emily Bronte. So very beautiful, along with some older roses. So Alfred Colombo, Nuts de Young, Tuscany Superb, and Wild Rover all together. And they were on the edge of the show garden, so you could smell the roses. And I think a lot of people fell in love with Jo's garden because it had so many prominent roses. So you definitely want to be doing irrigation if you're going to be doing rose beds. If you've gone away from Chelsea, fallen in love with roses, if the springs are going to be as dry as we've just had and you're planning your rose bed this year, make sure you're going to invest in irrigation would be my tip, because it's been so dry. I've been watering my roses a lot this spring. As well as roses, Jo's pink palette was really broken up by a wonderful Siberian iris. It was called Pakrishka, I think, but it was a wonderful, not orange, it was more cinnamon and buff brown. And again, going back to how dry it's been, Siberian irises, they do prefer to have quite a moist soil. So again, if you've fallen in love with the Siberian irises this year at the show, do put them in part of your garden that hopefully keeps a bit of that spring moisture. They're not going to love it bone dry at all. They're not like bearded irises, but they're wonderful for shady gardens especially. So if you've got areas of dappled shade, Siberian irises are going to be very happy there, or also around ponds and that kind of thing. Equally, they'd be happy in a large pot maybe that has got very poor drainage. They'll love that then. I think at Perch Hill, Sarah's got Siberian irises, black gamecock, and Josie's planted them in quite deep cattle troughs that have got not good drainage. So they're kind of almost like bog gardens, but they like that moisture. Interestingly enough, I didn't spot a single peony on Main Avenue, but going back to the Great Pavillion, Claire Austin, along with Plant Heritage, had got these lovely kind of chest-height raised beds, and they'd got wonderful assortments of peonies and bearded iris, and it was such a pleasure to witness them, particularly on press day when they'd all freshly opened. The bees were going absolutely crazy for these peonies, so I have actually fallen in love with peonies. I know they don't flower for long, but they are the most tutu flamingo Alice in Wonderland flower. My favourite, to be honest, was a classic one called Buckle-Eye Bell. Very deep claret, but kind of semi-double, so you get these gorgeous golden stamens through it. And the bumblebees, they were just rolling around and then flying out the door of the Great Pavillion. So yeah, I really like Plant Heritage, because for me, that's the whole point of going to Chelsea. Not necessarily to fall in love with the show garden, but you fall in love with specific plants and you go, yeah, I'm gonna make the effort to find that and discover the nursery I can buy that from. And then you'll always remember that time you went to Chelsea. You'll go, oh yeah, that was because I went to Chelsea that year. So I love that. Along with Plant Heritage, there was a fantastic stand of cosmos. And it's so wonderful to see cosmos in the Great Pavillion, especially so because they've got Rubenza. And these cosmos had all been grown in lovely terracotta pots. And I spoke to a lovely guy who grew them, and he said, I'm just like you, I'm sowing these cosmos in my kitchen. I think he sowed them back in January, so very, very early, but minimal mechanics to get these cosmos in flower, and they looked absolutely superb. And he had French fancies on his stall, so it was very nice to have a French fancy when I visited them. And on the Main Avenue, but not a show garden, it was a trade stand. Dalesford had celebrating their pelargonium scents and oils. They've got a fantastic kind of open-sided shed, so inspired, I think, possibly by Sarah's stand last year, because it was all made of beautiful reclaimed oak and a very beautiful tin roof. Within it were lovely kitchen tables covered in terracotta pots of all the scented Turkish delight pelargoniums, tourmentosum, attar of roses, and I love the fact that Lady Bamford had made them put a bath in with running water, because of course, as I often say, if you're lucky enough to have attar of roses and you're running a hot bath, just get a little muslin bag and a few leaves in that muslin bag, put it under the water of your running bath, and your whole bathroom will smell of Turkish delight. So I love that stand, and it was just lovely to go in and smell all the pelargoniums. They're there because they're launching a range of candles. They're beautiful candles. And pelargoniums did seem to be celebrated a lot this year, and they are, of course, fantastic pot plants and house plants too. So that was lovely. The other show garden that I really loved and supported this year was the Songbird Survival Trust Garden. That was a small garden. It was actually opposite the Newt Garden, which was all about South African planting. And this Newt Garden, it was almost like a Game of Thrones alley made up of huge boulders of rock with all the South Africa, desert-like succulent plants. And it was very, very amazing to be there because it's been such hot weather. You did actually feel like you were somewhere else. And they used lots of interesting props. It wasn't just plants. So they'd got within the orange sand ostrich eggs and skulls of sadly perished exotic animals. I think one skull was from a hippo, or I don't think they were real bones. I think they were set bones of hippos, because it was all about making you feel like you were in South Africa during a drought, I think. So it was very, very wonderful to experience a completely different part of the world, and very, very, very beautifully done, I have to say. But back to the Songbird Survival Trust Garden. So that was all about celebrating songbirds, and lots of birds in there that I know Sarah will be growing. Jenny Carnes is a puppeteer, actually, and she was there with an amazing yellowhammer puppet. When yellowhammers, if you don't know them, are these wonderful birds that you often find flying around country hedges and country lanes, and they've had a really sharp decline because they really suffer from over pesticide usage, and if the hedges are cut too much, they can't nest. But they're these most beautiful little birds. They're songbirds. They're like kind of canaries in a way. But this yellowhammer puppet was beautiful. It was made out of silk, and it was on a very tall pole. So it was lovely showing on Press Day. I showed Joanna Lumley that, and we've got amazing photos together under this yellowhammer puppeteer. But the Songbird Survival Trust garden was designed by Nicola Oakley, and she used lots of wonderful seeding plants. So lots of ornamental thistles, like the wonderful Circeum thistle that a lot of us know, seedling teasels, lots of perennial billowing grasses, lots of steepers, that kind of thing. So it's wonderful to see the message of the need to conserve songbirds at Chelsea on a Pacific garden. And the Trust do a lot of good work and research into why our songbirds are facing such harsh declines. And it's a really good charity to get involved in and look up if you want good advice on how to look after songbirds in your own garden, big or small. And of course, the Songbird Garden had a wonderful bird bath in the middle, kind of concealed by all the planting, so the songbirds could come down and have lots of nice little baths as they were within the planting and protected. So I really feel like I've charged you around Chelsea and I've pulled you along, and I do charge around Chelsea. The thing that I find funny about it is very, very social, Chelsea, and you end up doing a lot of cheek kissing. And so I've decided I'm going to start air kissing people. I don't like all this cheek to cheek and huggy. So I've air kissed lots of people this week. So I hope I said hello to a few listeners. I know I did. I know I spoke to quite a few people. So for those of you that haven't visited, I hope you've enjoyed my top Chelsea picks. And of course, you can find lots of things on BBC iPlayer if you didn't visit. And if you're thinking of visiting next year, I would really recommend visiting Chelsea on a coach. I remember the first time I visited Chelsea, I went on a coach from Nottingham. And the great thing about going on a coach is you get dropped off just outside the Bullring Gate, that little circle. So you get privileged access in a way into the show very quick. Because believe you me, when you go down to Sloane Square Tube, it's like an absolute riot of people trying to get on the tube. So I would recommend getting the coach to Chelsea if you want to go next year. But that is my Chelsea highlights. Next week, Sarah will be back with a wonderful packed episode, but it's been lovely giving you my top Chelsea favourites.
You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.